Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to another session on economy this week, wherein we'll be taking up all the important economic related articles which have appeared from 16th to 22nd July 2022 and have a discussion on these particular articles. Let's begin the discussion. The first very important article is regarding Debt Recovery Tribunals, DRT, Debt Recovery Tribunal. Now, some of you must be thinking, sir, I've never come across the term DRT in the studies. Some of you must be thinking, sir, I've come across, but I don't remember where. Let me refresh your memory. You must have read about Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, IBC. And whenever you talk about insolvency resolution in case of India, a company borrows and doesn't repay the loan. A corporate entity borrows and doesn't repay the loan. The lender or creditor will file the complaint, or let's say the application against this borrower at NCLT, National Company Law Tribunal. And whenever an individual or a retail borrower, many of you will be thinking, sir, what do you mean by a retail borrower here? Generally, individuals, when they take a loan, these are called as retail borrowers. For example, me, you, when we take the loans, a two-wheeler loan, a housing loan, etc., these are called as retail loans and we are referred to as retail borrowers. So whenever an individual or retail borrower takes a loan, doesn't repay the loan, then the lender, it could be a bank or a financial institution, etc., they will file an application against the individual borrowers at the debt recovery tribunals, DRTs. Now, just to give you a context regarding the DRTs have been established in India with the passage of Recovery of Debt Due to Banks and Financial Institutions Act of 1993. I'll repeat the statement here. The DRTs have been established with the passage of Recovery of a Debt Due to Banks and Financial Institutions Act of 1993. And when this particular act was passed and we established the DRTs, the whole objective was to ensure that once an application is filed against an individual borrower, the DRT will take up this application, resolve this particular matter within a span of 6 months or 180 days. Of course, within this particular 180 days, we expected 2 sittings to happen, or let's say the 2 sittings to take up, and the DRT will be resolving this particular case. Now, this is very important for a very simple reason. If you talk about NCLT, National Company Law Tribunal, under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the NCLT is expected to take, initially to begin with, 180 plus 90 days to resolve this particular case. And this now has been increased to 330 days. So, when you compare how much time has been allocated for NCLT under IBC, that is 330 days, and compare this against the DRT limit of 180 days, you will realize that under DRT we expected the resolution of the application to happen very soon, much sooner compared to what is provided for NCLT. And the advantage is very simple. Imagine here is a bank. Bank has given a loan. What is the function now? They are supposed to recollect, use the money, and again lend in the market. If the bank is unable to recollect the loans, when it wants to lend money, now it is forced to borrow from the depositors. It is forced to take depositors from, let's say, the corporate depositors or individual depositors such as you and me, and use this particular money to lend. Anyways, they are going to use it. But the problem here is, whenever the borrowings are not repaid, it will put a lot of pressure on the banking sector, not only in terms of, let's say, earnings, but also in terms of lending activities. That is the precise reason the DRT plays a very, very important role in terms of resolution of these kind of cases. Now, how many DRTs are there in case of India? The article has given the data regarding this. There are 39 DRTs and 5 debt recovery appellate tribunals. Now, the problem is very simple. One, the article clearly states that the number of cases which are there at the DRTs, pending at the DRTs, are very, very high. You don't have to mug up this particular data, but the article simply says that more than 1.61 lakh cases are pending at DRTs. More than 1.6 lakh cases pending means obviously the amount of loans which are stuck up, which are yet to be recollected by the banking sector is very high. And second very important point which has been flagged in this article is, whenever you talk about DRTs, the DRTs don't distinguish between a big value loan and a small value loan. Sir, what is the meaning of this? Let me give a very simple example here. Imagine you are a bank. You have given loan to two borrowers. To one borrower, you have given a loan of, let's say, 1 lakh rupees. Rather than 1 lakh, I'll take, let's say, 20 lakh rupees. Why, you will understand just in a minute. And to another borrower, you have given loan of, let's say, 2 crore rupees. Now imagine both of them have defaulted. Both of them are not going to repay this particular amount. Now tell me which of the two accounts or which of the two loans you want to be resolved very, very soon. I hope you understand my statement. I'll repeat it again. Of these particular two accounts, where one borrower has taken a loan of 20 lakh, he is defaulting, he is not repaying, and another borrower has taken 2 crore rupees, defaulting, not repaying. Which of the two loan accounts you want to be resolved very soon, very quick? Your answer should be, sir, the second borrower. Simple, the value of the loan is much, much higher. Now the problem in regards to the DRT's functioning is very simple here. The DRTs don't distinguish, they do not distinguish between these kind of loans. If a loan where the value is 20 lakh, default has happened, there also the adjournments will take place. It will take longer period of time. And even in case of the borrower who has yet to repay, let's say 2 crore rupees, that case will also be adjourned like this. So the argument provided in the article is very simple. The number of cases which are pending at DRTs are very high. Hence, the banking sector are asking for special debt recovery tribunals. And special because, please understand this, there are high value loans. There are high value loans, that is loans of 100 crore rupees or more. These kind of loans should be taken on war footing, and these particular loan accounts should be resolved much sooner so that it will provide relief to the banking sector. That is the point the article is actually making here. Now, based on the discussion that we have had so far, one MCQ. Consider the following statements. DRT takes up cases of all the companies which have taken loans and defaulted on the repayment. Statement 1 is wrong, because whenever you talk about companies, and specifically all the companies, that's the underlying term here. Whenever you talk about companies, generally it is the NCLT where the creditors will file the case or file the application. Second, DRTs take up cases where the amount of debt due to any bank or financial institution is 20 lakh or more. This is a factual information, but nevertheless correct one. What is the meaning of the statement? Whenever the loan, or let's say the debt that is due is 20 lakh rupees or more, in such cases only, the applications can be filed at a debt recovery tribunals, DRTs. Some of you might be thinking, sir, if it is 20 lakh or more, agreed. What if the loan value is less than that? What is the debt that is owed is less than that? In such cases, these are taken up by civil courts. These are taken up under civil courts. So this earlier was 10 lakh rupees. Now has been increased by the government to 20 lakh rupees. Second statement is correct. Right option for this question is option B. Let me go to the next article regarding central government debt. Important points before we look at what is given in the article. Whenever they are talking about public debt, remember this, it simply means they are talking about central government's debt. In addition to the term public debt, there is also one more term, general government debt. General government debt. And when they use the term general government debt, it is the sum total of the central government as well as the state government debt. Now, what is the point? What are the important points here? Because of the pandemic, the borrowings of the central government and the state governments, both of them have increased. It is pretty much evident when you look at the fiscal deficit of the states and the fiscal deficit of the central government. Under the FRBM, we want to bring down the fiscal deficit to 3%. And even if you look at the FRBM review committee, that is NK Singh committee, they have given a recommendation to reduce the general debt to 60% and the central debt to 40%. But the fact of the matter is, in the last couple of years, because of the higher borrowings of the central government as well as the state government, the general debt has increased and the central government debt also is on a higher level. The overall, or let's say the general debt, as per the RBI report, is around 90% of GDP. Around 90% of GDP. And when I say around, you should simply make a note that I am rounding off the number. Don't say that, sir, you are quoting a wrong number. I read it, it is 89.4. 89.4% is the actual number. I simply rounded off to around 90% of GDP. Now, the concern related to this is, whenever the debt to GDP ratio increases, it simply means the liability of the government is very high. And when the liability of the government increases, two things. One, the government somehow has to repay this particular liability in the future, which will restrict the amount of expenditure that the government can do in the future. Sir, what do you mean by this? I'll just give you a very simple example. Look at where the government of India has proposed the expenditures for the current financial year. You will realize that around 20% plus of this particular expenditure is not going to be spent on infrastructure, it is not going to be spent on, let's say, subsidies, etc. It is because of the borrowings done by the government, which means the borrowings which have been done in the past, the repayment is happening now. In the same way, regarding this particular higher debt to GDP ratio, it is a cause of concern. Higher debt to GDP ratio always means there is a liability on the shoulders of the government. Second, whenever there is a higher debt to GDP ratio, there is also concern regarding the yield rates in the market, as well as, remember this, the crowding out impact it will create in the market. The yield rate as well as the crowding out. Because understand the logic here, whenever government tends to borrow more and more from the market, demand for the money increases, that will definitely have an impact on the yield rates in the market. What about this particular idea for crowding out? As per the theory of crowding out, whenever the government increases its borrowing, the demand for the money increases, interest rates in the market or general or overall interest rates in the market will tend to rise up, and this becomes a problem for the private sector investment. Private sector tends to invest lesser and lesser during that particular period. This is a basic issue related to higher debt to GDP ratio of the government. But one silver lining that has been quoted in the article is very simple here. The central government revised estimates of the debt to GDP ratio was around 60%. That was for the financial year 21 and 22, we expected the debt to GDP ratio to be around 59.9% or let's say around 60%. But the latest data given by the government says that it is not actually around 60%. We have been able to bring it down, drag it down to 56.29%, and I'll simply round it off to 56%. Now, what is the reason? Why initially the revised estimates stated around 60%, now we have been able to control it at around 56%. What are the reasons? Two very important reasons or causes. One, the government's fiscal deficit has become lower, or the fiscal deficit compared to the estimate has been lower. Fiscal deficit essentially represents what is the borrowings done by the government. And the government data itself says that whatever our estimates was, we have borrowed less than that. How much lesser? Around 78,000 crore rupees lesser. This is one reason why the fiscal deficit is lower, which has also reduced the debt to GDP ratio. And the second reason is there is an upward revision of GDP. There is an upward revision of GDP, gross domestic product. Sir, what is the meaning of all of this? Let me give you a very simple calculation. Don't mug it up. UPSC will not ask you this. Imagine this is a representation. Debt is, let's say, 10 crore rupees and the GDP is, let's say, 100 crore rupees. So in simple terms, the debt to GDP ratio becomes how much? 10%. Now, if I increase these, or let's say if I change these particular parameters, That is, rather than having a debt of 10 crore rupees, what if the debt is 9 crore rupees? And the GDP is revised upwards, rather than keeping it at, let's say, 100 crore rupees. Now, what if it is 110 crore rupees? Even if you use the calculator and calculate it, I'm pretty sure the debt to GDP ratio will be much lower than 10%, somewhere just above 8%. That is exactly what has happened here. The numerator has become lower because government has borrowed lesser amount of money, fiscal deficit is lesser. That is the reason numerator has become lower. And the denominator, there has been an upward revision. Initially we used estimates. You don't have to mug up exact data. That is also given here. You don't have to mug up exact data. Not required for UPSC. So initially we used estimates. Now we have got actual numbers. And the actual is higher than the estimate. And that is actually has led to reduction in the debt to GDP ratio. So these are certain very important points which have been provided in the article here. In addition to this, just have a glance at this particular debt to GDP ratio of the central government. UPSC tends to ask a trend-based question. There is this practice of asking a trend-based question. So if there is a question on, let's say, the debt to GDP ratio for last 10 years, last 5 years, doesn't matter. The trend is important. Has it consistently increased or has it consistently decreased? And if you look at the last 5 years, you will realize that it has neither consistently increased nor consistently decreased. So there is no trend or there is no uniform trend that can be observed in the central government's debt to GDP ratio which has been provided here. So these are certain very important points given in the article. Next article regarding the regulation of urban cooperative banks. Now what are the important points here? First and foremost, understand this. In the last couple of years, because of various issues that have cropped up in the banking sector as well as even in the non-banking sector, Government of India as well as RBI have been taking a lot of measures to improve the regulation in these particular sectors. For example, couple of months ago, RBI announced that they will have a scale-based regulatory system regulating NBFC sector. We have seen a pyramid-like structure earlier in the videos, where the NBFCs will be classified based on certain parameters. And as the NBFCs will keep on getting classified at a higher level, regulations imposed by RBI on these NBFCs will keep on increasing. Second, in the context of cooperative banking structure, post the debacle of PMC, Punjab Maharashtra Cooperative Bank, Government of India as well as RBI, both of them have been increasing the regulation or let's say oversight on these particular urban cooperative banks. Now very recently, RBI has announced that some of the recommendations of Vishwanathan Committee will be implemented by RBI in order to better regulate urban cooperative banks. And as per the announcement done by RBI, now the UCBs would be divided into 4 tiers or 4 levels. And based on the level of the presence of the UCB, the regulation will also change. Now some of you might be thinking, sir, what is the need for this? What is the need? Simple. The argument of the UCBs is that we are not like commercial banks. If you talk about, let's say, SBI, ICICI, Punjab National Bank, etc., these are commercial banks. And the regulation of RBI regarding the commercial banks is much more stringent. It is much more, right, let's say, very strict. But we are not like those particular banks. For example, barring some of these particular UCBs, such as, let's say, Saraswat Bank, most of these UCBs have either 1 or 2 branches. That's it. Operational branches are 1 or 2. And the whole idea of UCB, right, because these are very lesser in terms of branches, these are basically portrayed or let's say marketed as neighborhood banking units. So their argument was, we are not like commercial banks, do not impose the same regulations that you are having on the commercial banks on us also. So looking at all of this, RBI earlier had set up a committee, and based on the recommendations of the committee which were published or put in public domain by RBI last year, now Government of India, to be very precise, RBI here, says that we will have a 4-tier structure of UCBs. These are tier 1, 2, 3 and 4. Of course, the term tier is common for all of them. Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 and tier 4. In case of tier 1, RBI says that these are supposed to have a net worth of 2 crore rupees at least 2 crore rupees. These are supposed to have a net worth of at least 2 crore rupees. What about the remaining 3 tiers or remaining 3 levels of UCBs? These are supposed to have a net worth of at least 5 crore rupees. Okay, net worth of 2 crore rupees and net worth of 5 crore. What does the term net worth mean here? Net worth simply represents, if I want to put it in a very simple sentence, net worth represents the difference between the assets and liabilities of an entity. For example, if the assets of an entity is, let's say, 10 crore rupees and the liabilities of this entity is, let's say, 5 crore rupees, I'll simply come to a conclusion, net worth is worth 5 crore rupees. Again, don't get into the calculations, UPSC will not ask you those. So first, based on the net worth, we will be classifying these particular UCBs. What is the reason? RBI says higher net worth means these particular banks will be able to take care of their businesses or liabilities in a much better way. The UCBs will be strengthened with these kind of regulations. This is one very important change that RBI has announced. Second very important change, I'm pretty sure all of you have learned about CRAR. If not, please read about it. The term CRAR is basically associated with Basel guidelines or Basel regulations, and CRAR stands for capital to risk weighted assets ratio. And the argument is very simple here. This CRAR is supposed to be maintained by the banking sector in order to overcome certain issues over a period of time, because they are going to take a lot of risk, for example market risk, operational risk, etc. RBI now for the UCBs says that these particular UCBs which are classified under tier 1, they will have to maintain a CRAR of 9%. They will have to maintain a CRAR of 9%, and all the other tier 2, tier 3 and tier 4 banks, they will have to increase this particular CRAR to 12%. Now let me ask you a very simple question. Please put the answer in the comment section. What do you think is the CRAR of other banks in India? Is it same? If yes, how much? If it is different, then how much percentage for which type of a bank? For example, we have scheduled commercial banks, we have public sector banks, we have, let's say, payment banks, we have small finance banks. What kind of CRAR is supposed to be maintained by these particular banks? Done? So that is my question to you people. Now some of you will be thinking, sir, net worth as well as CRAR. Now the banks will find it very difficult to meet this particular criteria. Here is the argument of RBI. First and foremost, we are doing this in order to increase the sustainability of these particular banks. Second, in context of the net worth, the RBI report itself says that many of the UCBs will be meeting this particular criteria already. They are going to meet this particular criteria, which simply means their net worth is already higher. And what about this particular CRAR? If they are unable to meet this particular target of, let's say, 9% and 12% like this, certain time period will be provided to them. Okay, time period of 5 years will be provided to them so that they will have a glide path. Glide path simply means annually targets will be given to them. They can easily meet these particular targets in a span of 5 years. So a glide path has been provided for the UCBs if they are not going to meet these particular regulations right now. Third very important recommendation, or let's say the reform that has been announced by RBI in the context of UCBs, is that they will make it very easy for the UCBs, provided they meet certain conditions, to open new branches. I'll repeat the statement. If the UCBs meet certain conditions or let's say criteria, RBI says, I will make it very easier for them to open new branches. That is, if they meet the criteria, these are, let's say, eligible UCBs. RBI says, now I'll make the process much more easier, where they can apply and get these particular approvals or licenses to open the branches very easy. Now please remember this, the limit that RBI says is, these eligible UCBs can open up to 10% of the bank branches that they have in the last financial year. In the last financial year, what was the number of the bank branches? up to 10% of these particular numbers, now in the next year, they can open up by getting the license or the clearances from the RBI very, very easily. So these are certain very, very important reforms that RBI has announced in the context of urban cooperative banks. Now, based on this, I have given a question. As per the recent regulations of RBI regarding UCBs, CRAR of 8% is applicable to all the UCBs. Statement 1 is wrong. It is 9% for tier 1. For the rest, it is 12%. Eligible UCBs are permitted to open new branches up to 10% of the number of branches as at the end of the previous financial year. Statement 2 is correct. Right option for the question is option B, only 2. Let me go to the next article regarding remittances. First and foremost, understand this very carefully. Where does the term remittances actually come in the UPSC preparation for you people? I'm pretty sure all of you have read about balance of payments, BOP. And within the balance of payments, where I'm pretty sure you must have mugged up a table like this. There are two parts to the table. The table is divided into two parts, current and capital. Remittances are generally mentioned in the current account. Remittances are mentioned in the current account. Inward remittances and outward remittances. And one point you generally come across the term BOP, or let's say associated with the remittances, is that India historically has been a top country in terms of receiving or in terms of inward remittances. And the same report, or let's say the same data, has been provided but with certain changes. What are the important changes that you need to make a note here? Traditionally, when you say inward remittances will flow into India, two very important points. One, we generally say that most of the remittances or the highest amount of remittances flow into India from Gulf Cooperation Council countries. Right? There are certain number of countries in the GCC. From these particular countries, we receive a lot of inward remittances. And second, the state which receives the highest amount of remittances has generally been the state of Kerala. But as per the latest report which has been published by RBI regarding the remittances, both of these particular trends now have been changed. That is, first one, rather than receiving the highest amount of inward remittances from GCC, we have shifted that country orientation has got shifted. Now we are receiving the highest amount of inward remittances from USA. Right, around 23 to 24% of the remittances that you have received are from USA itself. And this particular data is for the year 2021. Remember this, right? That is, it is for 2020 and 2021. That's the first point. Second point, traditionally I said Kerala is the state which receives the highest amount of inward remittances. This also has changed. Now it is not Kerala, rather it is Maharashtra. And as per RBI report, please make a note of this, or please mark these points up. Kerala has received 10% of the total inward remittances, and Maharashtra has received 35% of inward remittances. Third very important point regarding this. The amount of inward remittances that India has received accounts to 12% of total or global remittances. Okay, 12% of total or global remittances. And this 12% of global remittances accounts for $89.4 billion. It accounts for $89.4 billion. And when you compare this particular data for 2021 with the previous year, of course, there has been a rise of inward remittances in the year 2021 compared to previous year. Why? The recovery is taking place, especially the recovery in the USA has been one of the attributed reasons why the remittances from USA have basically topped this particular list as such. So these are certain very, very important points. Apart from this, what else you need to make a note? First one, this is a list of the countries. My recommendation, please remember these particular countries. Please remember, UPSC can ask you this. What kind of questions can be made from this particular list? For example, he will give you a list of the countries, ask you to find out from which country the highest amount of inward remittances has come into India for 2021. First kind of question. Second kind of question, which of the following countries account for majority of the inward remittances? That could be another question. So these kind of questions can be asked in UPSC. Please make a note of this. So as already mentioned, USA tops this particular list, and the amount of inward remittances that we have received from USA has been the highest for the year 2021. Now some of you looking at the graph will say, sir, I want to correct you here. If you see, the blue color line is high here, and the blue color line represents of UAE. That is, it is representing the inward remittances from UAE. But you are saying, right, we have received the highest amount of remittances from USA. You are wrong. Absolutely no. The blue color line represents for the financial year 17, that is 2016 and 2017. And this, let's say, orange color, right, the orange color line represents, or the bar graph represents for the financial year 2021. And when you see that, you will realize that the orange color line representing USA is at a higher level compared to that of representing UAE, which means the highest amount of inward remittances we have received from USA. Right, apart from this, other major contributors are UK, Singapore, Arabia, Kuwait, etc. Apart from this, state-wise data. Which state has received the highest amount of inward remittances? Same. Look at the orange line. Look at the orange line. The traditional states which received lot of remittances are the three southern states, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, as well as Kerala. And if you look at the blue color line, you will realize this, because the blue color line represents for the year financial year 17. So if you look at the data, you will realize that for the earlier period, it was these particular states which accounted for huge amount of inward remittances. But today, no, it is actually the state of Maharashtra which accounts for more than 35% of inward remittances. Apart from this, the RBI report also has quoted one more important piece of information. Those particular transfers of smaller value are very, very high. The transfers of smaller value, that is less than $200 rupees, these are very, very high. Now, two very important points to note here. One, sir, you are talking about remittances. What is the use of these particular remittances? What is the use of the remittances? These remittances can be used for investment purposes, are used for providing for household expenditure. For example, imagine person A has parents. Person A will go to, let's say, USA, earn there and send back part of the remittances back to the parents. For household expenses can also be used. These can be used in bank deposits, keeping bank deposits, for example, NRE deposits, and etc. There are many other uses. That's the first point I wanted to make. Second, this will be another very important point here. Yes, USA has topped this particular list, but this is not the first time that the USA is there in the top of the list. Because even before the 2008 global financial crisis, we used to receive lot of these particular inward remittances from Northern America itself. And the data will show you that more than 40% and many of the years 45, 48% of the inward remittances right before 2008 actually was coming from Northern America itself. But over a period of time, that is post the global financial crisis, the contribution from these particular countries has come down, and the contribution from, that is when I say contribution in terms of percentages, proportion. So the percentage contribution of inward remittances from the GCC countries actually has increased. So these are the various concepts, or let's say the points regarding remittances. Please go through them. One MCQ. Consider the following statements regarding inward remittances for 2020-21. India is the largest recipient of inward remittances. Statement 1 is correct. It accounts for 15% of the total global remittances. Statement 2 is wrong. It is 12% of the global remittances. Third, the inward remittances for the above year are higher compared to previous year. Yes, compared to the previous year, these remittances are higher. Third statement is also correct. Right option for this question is option B. 1 and 3 are correct. Next article is regarding food stocks. Now in this article, 2 points to make a note of. One is regarding Government of India asking WTO to allow government to export food grains to the international market. And second, terminology that is mentioned here, not so much discussion, but I would recommend that you please go through this particular concept, that is World Food Program. I'll come to this. Let me start with the first point here. The Government of India, during one of the meetings very recently, has asked the WTO to allow the government to export food grains. Now some of you might be thinking, but sir, we already export food grains. Please understand the difference here. Imagine this is Indian economy. Imagine, I know it doesn't look like Indian economy, but imagine from the Indian economy, government procures food grains by paying MSP. Done? Government procures food grains by paying MSP, and the private traders will also procure, the food grains by paying certain price, that is the market price, and they can export it. They can very well export it. Now, why is the government asking about this particular thing here? Very simple. As per the WTO norms, as per the WTO guidelines, the member countries which procure the food grain by paying MSP, minimum support price, they are not allowed to export these particular food grains, because that will create destabilization in the international market. Whereas the private traders, because they are going to pay the market prices, irrespective of whatever the MSP is, they are going to pay the market prices, they are allowed to procure and export these particular food grains to international market. Now, second very important point here, why is government of India seeking or asking for this? Simple. Government says because of the war that has been happening between Russia and Ukraine, food grain supplies to the international market has been affected. The prices of the food grains has skyrocketed, and some of these particular countries which are dependent on the import of the food grains, they are feeling the heat of this. They are suffering because of this. And that is a precise reason now there is a concern over the global food inflation, concern over rising poverty levels in these particular dependent or import dependent countries, which could lead to or which could increase the poverty rates. So government of India is saying, we have lot of food grains, we have a very high amount of food grains, more than what is actually required. So why don't you allow us to export these particular food grains to the international market? That is one point of discussion provided in the article. Second very important point of discussion is regarding World Food Program. Now imagine here is a country. I'll come to the World Food Program. Right, just let's start with the example. Imagine this is a country A. Certain amount of food grains are produced. Now they want to export it to the international market. Allowed? Yes, allowed. But the problem will arise when the exports are supposed to be done, but the prices in the domestic market are increasing. There is a concern over food security in the domestic market itself. At that particular point of time, the government of country A can impose export restrictions. Temporary export restrictions can be imposed by the government, and under WTO that is allowed. But there is one concern here. There is a program run by United Nations, World Food Program, and under World Food Program also the food grains can be sent like this. So governments can even impose restrictions whenever the food grains are procured for World Food Program. Right, so very recently there has been a lot of discussion regarding this. Should the governments be allowed to impose restrictions or export restriction whenever the procurement is done for World Food Program? Or there should be an exemption, I repeat, or there should be an exemption to the exports which are done for World Food Program. And in the very recently concluded ministerial conference, in fact this was one of the points of discussion, member countries have pledged, or basically they have stated they will agree to binding commitments over these particular the prohibition, right, prohibition over export restrictions they are going to impose. So that is one more point of discussion here. Please go through that. Now based on this, I have given a question. Consider the following statements. India receives but doesn't contribute under the World Food Program statement is wrong. In fact, in the year 2015, India was the largest contributor of food grains under the World Food Program. Under WTO rules, member countries are allowed to impose permanent export restrictions. Statement 2 is wrong. Before you start typing, sir, you are wrong there. Please understand, I am saying, are the countries allowed to impose permanent export restrictions? No. They are allowed to impose temporary export restrictions, not permanent. So second statement is wrong. Right option for this particular question is option D, neither 1 nor 2. Let me go to the next article regarding zero coupon, zero principal bonds. I'll start using the acronym ZC, ZP. Okay, rather than reading out every time, ZC, ZP. Now, what is a zero coupon, zero principal bond? Imagine this is a company or even for that matter government, because the bonds can be issued by company and even by governments. The company will issue the bond, you will purchase the bond, you are here, you will purchase the bond, which means you have given money to the company, and the company in return will pay you interest. In case of bonds, this is called as coupon. And upon the maturity period, assuming the bond has a maturity period of let's say 3 years, 4 years, etc. like this, the principal amount, that is whatever money you had paid initially, that will also be paid back to you. This is how generally the concept of bonds or debt instruments will work in the market. But now there is an introduction of new type of a debt instrument, zero coupon, zero principal bond. And the name itself will give out the meaning of these particular bonds. The principal that you have paid, that is the amount that you have paid to purchase the bond, amount will not be given to you. And the interest or the coupon on these particular bonds will also be not paid to you. These are called as zero coupon, zero principal bond. Now some of you looking at this explanation will say, sir, if I am not going to earn any interest, if I am not going to get back my principal amount, why should I even invest in the first place in such bonds? Very valid question. Let me start with another example to explain that. Imagine you are a billionaire. I hope you understand, I am making you a billionaire now. Imagine you are a billionaire. You have loads and loads of money. You have another house, right, which is let's say 20-stored or 34-storied house now. You have lots of money, you want to provide it for charity, but you don't have so much of time. So what you will do, you will simply go to a charitable organization or let's say social enterprise. You will give a check of let's say 1 crore rupees and ask them to use it for charity purposes. Now the one problem here that generally is associated with such kind of charity work is, how can you ensure that this 1 crore rupees is being utilized efficiently? How can you ensure that? Right, you have simply torn a check or taken a check like this, check leaf, written and given it. How do you ensure that that 1 crore rupees is being efficiently utilized by this particular charity organization? That becomes a problem. To overcome this, a recent concept that has been introduced now in the Indian market is zero coupon, zero principal. What happens under this? Same example, you are a billionaire, you want to give for charity. Rather than simply giving a check like this, rather than giving money, you will go to social stock exchanges. Yes, SE, social stock exchanges. Just like a Bombay Stock Exchange and a National Stock Exchange, now there is a social stock exchange. And you will purchase the bonds and give money to let's say a charitable organization, non-profit organization. Now this money will go to the through the social stock exchange to a charitable organization or let's say a social enterprise, non-profit organization, and now this particular non-profit organization can utilize the money to fulfill the objectives. So what is the advantage here? Some of you might be thinking, sir, earlier also same thing happened, but now the mechanism has changed. What is the big thing here? Big thing is that now you will be concerned, how is this particular NPO performing? Performing in the sense, what does the market say about this particular NPO? Are there any investors or let's say are there any people, donors in the market who are purchasing the bonds which are issued by this social enterprise? If nobody is buying that, why will you buy? And one more very important point is, this will promote transparency in the system. If the NPO wants to sell its bonds, which are nothing but zero coupon, zero principal bonds, now it has to conduct audits. There has to be a transparency in the system so that the donors will have more faith in the functioning of these particular NPOs. That is a precise reason. Very recently, the Finance Ministry has given a security status or has recognized these particular bonds as a securities under one of the acts, that is the Securities Contracts Regulation Act of 1956. Please remember the name of that. Securities Contracts Regulation Act of 1956. What is the point here? Whenever any securities or instruments are supposed to be sold to you in the market, for example, mutual funds, bonds, shares, etc., they have to be notified as a securities under this particular act. So the Finance Ministry very recently has announced that the ZCZP will be part of securities under this particular act. So these are certain very important points regarding the zero coupon, zero principal bonds. Next article, just factual information regarding Oil palm exports. In the last couple of months, or let's say even in the last couple of years, one agriculture commodity, or let's say one commodity in the international market whose price has been rising up has been palm oil. And looking at the concerns over the domestic prices, the Indonesian government had imposed restrictions over the exports of palm oil. Simple. They were concerned about the domestic prices, so they imposed restrictions with respect to exports. Now, as a result of this, what has happened? The stocks with the domestic market or within the domestic market has increased. Now, there is a concern over huge amount of a stock. That is the precise reason very recently the government of Indonesia has announced that till August 31st, till the end of the month of August, these export restrictions will be loosened, will be withdrawn. Right, and as a result of this, we expect the exports of palm oil from this country to increase. And since the month of April, the good news is that since the month of April already, the palm oil prices had started declining, has started softening. Now with higher supply from Indonesia, it is expected that further there will be a reduction, fall in the international palm oil. And India being a major dependent, or let's say the import dependent country of these particular oils, will be very happy with this particular outcome. So these are certain important points regarding oil palm exports. Final article regarding the panel on MSP. Now nothing much is important here. Couple of important points. Earlier government of India had announced 3 agriculture laws or the reforms. But later, because of lot of pressure, Government of India announced that they will be withdrawing these particular 3 laws and had promised that they will be setting up a panel to look at MSP, how to make the MSP effective. But please be very careful here. The government simply stated that we want to make MSP effective and we want the committee to basically recommend regarding promotion of zero budget natural farming, ZBNF. Nowhere in this particular recommendations, or let's say the terms of references, Government of India has actually asked regarding legalization of MSP. Though that has been one of the demands of the farmer organizations, Government of India has not given that as a let's say the terms of references to the MSP panel. Next very important point is this particular panel will be headed by the former Union Agriculture Secretary Mr. Sanjay Agrawal. Remember the name of the person, that can also be asked by UPSC. So these are the 2 important points here. Apart from that, don't mug up who are the members, not required, and there are no recommendations set. So this particular committee, factual information right now, when they will give the recommendations, definitely yes, this committee recommendations will become very important for your exams. Done. So these are the various articles as well as the questions related to articles for the duration 16th to 22nd July 2022. If you like the initiative, please hit the like button, provide your valuable inputs in the comment section below, and if you are yet to subscribe to BYJU'S Exam Prep, kindly do. Thank you. Have a great day.